Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the English Talk community. I'm Julia, and I'm so excited you decided to join me today. I want to start by saying something that I think many of you will relate to. If you're listening to this right now, there's a good chance you've been learning English for months, maybe even years, and yet you still feel like something is missing. You can read English articles, you understand movies with subtitles, you might even know thousands of vocabulary words, but when it comes to actually speaking or understanding native speakers in real conversations, you freeze up. Does that sound familiar? If you're nodding your head right now, I want you to know that you are absolutely not alone in this struggle. I receive messages every single day from listeners all around the world telling me the exact same thing. They say, Julia, I've studied English grammar for so long, I can write emails perfectly, but when someone speaks to me naturally, I panic. I understand everything in my head, but somehow I can't make my mouth work the way I want it to. And you know what I tell them every single time? This is completely normal, and more importantly, it's completely fixable. Here's the thing that most traditional English courses won't tell you. The reason you feel confident reading but nervous listening and speaking is because you've been training only half of your English brain. You've been feeding your brain with written English, but your ears and your speaking muscles haven't had nearly enough practice. Think about it this way. When you learned your native language as a child, did you start by reading grammar books? Of course not. You listened, you absorbed, you repeated what you heard, and then naturally, speaking followed. Today, I'm going to share with you the exact daily practices that have helped thousands of my listeners break through this barrier. These aren't complicated methods that require hours of study time. These are simple, practical strategies that you can start using today. And I promise you, if you stick with them, you'll notice improvements in your listening and speaking confidence within just a few weeks. But before we dive in, I want you to do something for me. I want you to imagine yourself 3 months from now. Picture yourself in a situation where English is being spoken around you. Maybe it's a work meeting, maybe it's a conversation with neighbors, maybe it's ordering food while traveling. Instead of feeling that familiar knot in your stomach, instead of staying quiet and hoping no one asks you a direct question, you feel calm. You understand what people are saying, and when you speak, the words flow naturally. You're not translating in your head, you're not searching for perfect grammar, you're just communicating. How would that feel? Amazing, right? That version of yourself isn't a fantasy. It's absolutely achievable, and it starts with understanding one simple truth. Fluency isn't about perfection. It's about connection and communication. Native speakers make mistakes all the time. They use simple words, they repeat themselves, they pause to think. The difference is they've trained their ears to understand natural English rhythms and patterns, and that's exactly what we're going to help you do. If you're finding value in what I'm sharing so far, I'd love for you to hit that like button right now. It tells me you're ready to take your English to the next level, and it helps other English learners just like you find this community. And if you haven't subscribed yet, please do that too, because I create new episodes every week specifically designed to help you build real English confidence through listening practice. We're building something special here at the English Talk community, a place where English learners from every corner of the world support each other on this journey. You know what I love most about our community? It doesn't matter if you're just starting out or if you've been learning English for years. It doesn't matter if you're from Tokyo or Berlin or Mexico City. We all share the same goal, and we all face similar challenges. That connection, that understanding that you're not struggling alone, that's powerful. That's what's going to keep you motivated when practice feels difficult. I need to be completely honest with you about something that might surprise you. The reason you're struggling with listening and speaking isn't because you're not smart enough or because you don't have talent for languages. The reason is that the traditional way most of us were taught English is actually working against natural language learning. Let me explain what I mean by this. Most English courses focus heavily on teaching you rules first, then expecting you to apply those rules in real conversations. You spend months learning about present perfect tense, conditional sentences, and complex grammar structures. You memorize vocabulary lists, you fill out worksheets, you study irregular verbs. And yes, all of that knowledge is valuable, but here's the problem. When you're in a real conversation with an English speaker, your brain doesn't have time to think about those rules. Real conversations happen fast, with natural pauses, interruptions, different accents, and everyday expressions that don't follow the textbook patterns you studied. Think about how you learned your first language when you were a child. Did your parents sit you down with grammar books when you were 2 years old? Did they explain verb conjugations before you could even walk? Of course not. You learned by listening to thousands of hours of your native language being spoken around you. You absorbed the rhythm, the melody, the natural flow of speech. You heard the same phrases repeated over and over in different situations until they became automatic in your brain. Then, when you were ready, you started repeating what you heard, making mistakes, getting correction through natural interaction, not through red pen marks on paper. But somehow, when we become adults learning a second language, we think we need to take a completely different approach. We believe we need to understand every rule before we can start practicing. We convince ourselves that we're not ready to listen to real English because we haven't mastered all the grammar yet. This creates a cycle where you keep studying more rules but never give your ears and your speaking muscles the practice they desperately need. Here's what I've observed after working with thousands of English learners. The students who make the fastest progress in listening and speaking are not necessarily the ones who know the most grammar rules. They're the ones who expose themselves to spoken English every single day, even when they don't understand everything. They're the ones who prioritize communication over perfection. They're willing to make mistakes, to sound imperfect, because they understand that mistakes are part of the learning process, not signs of failure. I want you to think about native English speakers for a moment. Do you think we speak with perfect grammar all the time? Absolutely not. We use incomplete sentences, we change direction mid-thought, we use slang and informal expressions that you'll never find in textbooks. We say things like, I was going to go to the store, but then I was like, maybe later, instead of, I was going to go to the store, but then I thought perhaps I should go later. Both communicate the same idea, but the natural version is what you actually need to understand and use. This is why so many of my listeners tell me they feel frustrated when they watch English movies or listen to podcasts. They think I know all these words individually, but when they're spoken together at natural speed, I get lost. That's not a sign that you need to study more vocabulary. That's a sign that you need more listening practice with natural spoken English. The beautiful truth is that your brain is already perfectly designed for language learning. Every human brain has this incredible ability to recognize patterns, to absorb rhythms, to make connections without conscious effort. You've already proven this by learning your native language. The same mechanisms that helped you master your first language are still there, waiting to help you with English. You just need to activate them through consistent listening practice. I know it can feel overwhelming when you realize that the approach you've been using might not be the most effective. Maybe you've spent money on courses. Maybe you've dedicated hours to studying grammar books. Maybe you've been telling yourself that you're just not good at languages. I want you to stop that negative self-talk right now. Every single successful English speaker I know started exactly where you are. They felt the same doubts, the same frustration, the same fear of making mistakes. I want to tell you about Sophia, a marketing student I met through our community who completely transformed her English confidence in just a few months. Sophia was studying at one of the top business universities in Madrid, and on paper, her English looked perfect. She consistently got excellent grades in her English courses. She could write marketing reports that impressed her professors, and she understood complex business texts without any problems. But Sophia had a secret that was making her feel incredibly frustrated and embarrassed. Every week, Sophia's marketing program held international video calls with students from universities in London, New York, and Sydney. These calls were designed to help students practice presenting marketing ideas in English and collaborating on global projects. For Sophia, these calls became a source of anxiety that kept her awake at night. While her classmates confidently shared their ideas, asked questions, and engaged in discussions, Sophia would sit there with her camera on, but her microphone muted, hoping nobody would call on her directly. The problem wasn't that Sophia didn't understand the topics being discussed. She had brilliant marketing ideas and could express them beautifully in Spanish. She even understood most of what the other students were saying when they spoke. But when it came to actually participating in the fast-paced conversations, Sophia felt completely lost. The American students spoke quickly with casual expressions she'd never heard in textbooks. The British students had accents that sounded nothing like the precise pronunciation she'd learned in class. The Australian students used slang and informal phrases that left her confused and unable to respond naturally. Sophia told me that the worst moment came during a group project presentation, where she was supposed to explain her team's marketing strategy to international partners. She had prepared everything perfectly, written out exactly what she wanted to say, and practiced in front of her mirror dozens of times. But when the moment came and real people started asking spontaneous questions, she froze. She could barely understand their natural, unscripted questions, and her carefully prepared answers suddenly felt robotic and awkward. That night, Sophia seriously considered switching to a program that didn't require English interaction. That's when Sophia discovered something that changed everything for her. She realized that all her English study had been focused on reading and writing, but her ears had never been trained to process natural English speech. She could recognize individual words when they were written on a page, but when those same words were spoken at normal speed with natural pronunciation, linking, and rhythm, her brain couldn't keep up. Sophia understood that her problem wasn't lack of knowledge, it was lack of listening practice. Sophia decided to try something different. Instead of buying another grammar book or enrolling in more formal classes, she committed to spending just 15 minutes every single morning listening to English while she had her breakfast. She didn't choose academic lectures or formal presentations. Instead, she found simple conversations, everyday discussions between English speakers talking about topics she genuinely enjoyed like travel, food, and lifestyle. At first, Sophia felt discouraged because she couldn't understand everything being said. But she remembered something important. She wasn't trying to analyze or translate every single word. Her goal was simply to let her brain get familiar with the natural sound and rhythm of English conversations. She focused on understanding the general meaning, the emotions behind the words, and the flow of natural speech patterns. Within just 2 weeks, Sophia noticed something amazing. During her morning listening sessions, she started recognizing phrases and expressions that she'd heard before. Words that had sounded unclear and confusing in previous days suddenly became clear and familiar. Her brain was starting to recognize English speech patterns the same way it recognized Spanish patterns, automatically and without conscious effort. But the real breakthrough came during her next international video call. When an American student asked her a question about consumer behavior, Sophia found herself understanding not just the words, but the natural way the question was asked. More importantly, when she responded, she didn't feel the need to translate her thoughts from Spanish to English first. The English phrases she'd been hearing every morning during breakfast started flowing naturally from her mouth. For the first time in months, Sophia participated actively in the discussion, and her international classmates complimented her insights and her clear communication. Sophia's transformation didn't happen because she suddenly learned new vocabulary or mastered complex structures. It happened because she finally gave her brain what it needed: consistent exposure to natural English speech patterns. She discovered that listening practice wasn't just about understanding words, it was about training her brain to process English at the speed and rhythm that native speakers actually use in real conversations. Let me share with you exactly what Sophia did to create this amazing transformation, because I know you're wondering how something so simple could be so effective. Sophia's approach was beautifully straightforward, and that's exactly why it worked so well. She didn't create a complicated study schedule or try to dedicate hours every day to English practice. Instead, she built her listening practice around something she was already doing every single morning: eating breakfast. Sophia realized that she spent about 15 minutes every morning sitting at her kitchen table, drinking coffee and eating toast before heading to university. Instead of scrolling through social media in Spanish or checking news websites, she decided to use this existing time for English listening practice. The brilliant thing about this approach is that it didn't require her to find extra time in her busy student schedule. She simply replaced one habit with another, more beneficial habit. But here's the key detail that made Sophia's routine so successful. She didn't choose challenging English content that would make her feel frustrated or overwhelmed. Instead, Sophia deliberately selected listening material that was slightly easier than what she could read comfortably. While she could read complex marketing articles and academic papers in English, she started her listening practice with simple, everyday conversations between English speakers, talking about topics like cooking, weekend plans, and travel experiences. Sophia told me that this decision felt counterintuitive at first. Part of her wanted to challenge herself with advanced business podcasts or academic lectures because that's what felt more relevant to her studies. But she understood that her goal wasn't to learn new information, it was to train her ears to recognize English speech patterns. Just like you wouldn't start physical exercise with the heaviest weights possible, Sophia knew she needed to start her listening practice with content that felt comfortable and manageable. Every morning, Sophia would put on her headphones, start playing simple English conversations, and focus completely on understanding the general meaning without worrying about catching every single word. If she missed something, she didn't rewind or pause to analyze what went wrong. She simply kept listening, trusting that her brain was absorbing the natural rhythm and patterns of English speech, even when she wasn't consciously understanding every detail. What happened during those first few weeks was exactly what Sophia hoped for. The English she was hearing started to sound less foreign and more familiar. Phrases that had seemed fast and unclear in week 1 became recognizable and easy to follow by week 2. By week 3, Sophia noticed that she was anticipating what speakers might say next, which meant her brain was starting to recognize common English conversation patterns. But the real magic happened when Sophia started expanding beyond her morning routine. After 3 weeks of consistent breakfast listening practice, she decided to watch an English movie that she'd seen before in Spanish. To her amazement, she realized she could follow the dialogue without subtitles for the first time in her life. Not every single word, but enough to understand the story, the emotions, and even some of the humor that had been lost in Spanish translation. This breakthrough gave Sophia the confidence to start participating more actively in her international video calls. When her American classmates spoke, their words no longer sounded like an incomprehensible stream of sounds. Sophia could identify where sentences began and ended. She could recognize common expressions and phrases, and most importantly, she had enough processing time to formulate her own responses, instead of getting lost trying to decode what had just been said. Sophia's routine evolved naturally as her confidence grew. She started with simple conversations about everyday topics, then gradually moved to slightly more complex discussions about lifestyle and culture. Eventually, she felt comfortable listening to business-related content, but by then, her ears were already trained to handle natural English speech patterns at normal speed. The beautiful thing about Sophia's approach is how sustainable it was. Because she built her listening practice around an existing daily habit, it never felt like an extra burden on her schedule. Because she chose content slightly below her comfort level initially, she never felt frustrated or overwhelmed. Because she focused on understanding rather than perfection, she enjoyed the process instead of stressing about making mistakes. Sophia also discovered something important about content selection. She realized that when she chose topics she was genuinely interested in, the listening practice felt more like entertainment than studying. When she listened to conversations about travel destinations she wanted to visit or food she wanted to try, she was naturally motivated to understand and engage with the content. This emotional connection made the learning process much more effective than trying to force herself through boring or irrelevant material. Within 6 weeks of starting this simple routine, Sophia's entire relationship with English had changed. She went from dreading international calls to looking forward to them. She stopped avoiding English-speaking tourists in Madrid and started offering help when she saw them looking confused. Most importantly, she realized that fluency wasn't about knowing every word or speaking perfectly. It was about being able to connect and communicate naturally with other English speakers. What Sophia discovered through her simple breakfast routine is actually backed by fascinating research about how human brains naturally acquire language. When I share this with my listeners, it always creates this wonderful moment of relief, because people realize they've been fighting against their brain's natural learning system instead of working with it. Let me explain what I mean by this, and I promise it will change how you think about your English learning journey. Every single person listening to this right now has already successfully mastered the most complex learning challenge any human faces: acquiring their first language. Think about this for a moment. When you were a baby, you couldn't read, you couldn't write, you had no concept of what a verb or noun was, yet somehow you managed to learn thousands of words and complex communication patterns. How did your brain accomplish this incredible feat? The answer is beautifully simple. Your brain spent months, actually years, just listening. From the moment you were born, you were surrounded by the sounds, rhythms, and patterns of your native language. Your parents, siblings, and caregivers spoke to you constantly, and your brain was like a powerful recording device, capturing every conversation, every song, every repeated phrase. You weren't trying to analyze or understand grammar rules. You were simply absorbing the natural flow and music of human speech. During those first months of life, something amazing was happening inside your brain. Every time you heard the same words or phrases repeated in different situations, your brain was creating neural pathways, building connections between sounds and meanings. When your mother said, "Are you hungry?" before feeding time, or "time for bed before sleep," your brain started recognizing these sound patterns and associating them with specific situations and emotions. Here's the crucial part that most adult language learners forget. You didn't start speaking until your brain had absorbed thousands of hours of listening input. You didn't wake up one morning and suddenly start forming complete sentences. Instead, you began with simple sounds, then single words, then gradually longer phrases, all based on the patterns you had been hearing and storing in your memory for months. This natural learning process never actually stops working. Your adult brain still has the same incredible ability to recognize patterns, absorb rhythms, and make connections between sounds and meanings. The difference is that as adults, we often try to shortcut this process by focusing on rules and analysis, instead of giving our brains the listening input they need to build those essential neural pathways. When you expose yourself to English listening practice every day, you're activating the same learning mechanisms that helped you master your native language. Your brain starts recognizing common English phrases, understanding where sentences naturally pause, and absorbing the melody and rhythm that makes English sound like English rather than just random words strung together. This is why Sophia's transformation happened so quickly and felt so natural. She wasn't forcing her brain to memorize new information. Instead, she was providing her brain with the raw material it needed to start recognizing English patterns the same way it had learned Spanish patterns years earlier. Her morning listening sessions were essentially reactivating her brain's natural language acquisition system. What many people don't realize is that understanding always comes before speaking and natural language learning. You understood your native language for months before you could produce it. You recognized your name, responded to simple commands, and showed clear comprehension long before you said your first word. This same process applies to learning English as an adult. When you focus on listening practice first, you're building the foundation that will eventually support confident speaking. Every English conversation you hear, even when you don't understand every word, is helping your brain recognize the natural patterns and rhythms of English speech. You're training your ears to distinguish between different English sounds, to recognize where one word ends and another begins, and to understand the emotional tone behind different types of sentences. Your brain is constantly making predictions about what it expects to hear next in any language. In your native language, this happens so automatically that you don't even notice it. When someone starts a familiar phrase, your brain often completes it before the speaker does. This same prediction ability will develop in English, but only if you give your brain enough listening input to recognize the patterns. The beautiful thing about this natural learning process is that it doesn't require conscious effort or stress. When Sophia listened to English conversations during breakfast, she wasn't straining to analyze every word. She was simply allowing her brain to do what it does best, recognize patterns and make connections. This relaxed approach actually makes the learning process more effective because stress and pressure can interfere with your brain's natural ability to absorb new language patterns. I want you to trust this process, even when it feels slow, or when you doubt whether you're making progress. Your brain is designed for language learning. You've already proven this by successfully learning your first language. The same incredible system that helped you understand and speak your native language is still there, ready to help you with English. You just need to provide it with consistent listening input and trust that the natural learning process is working, even when you can't see immediate results. Now that you understand how your brain naturally learns language through listening, let me help you create the perfect environment to support this process. The secret isn't about finding hours of extra time in your day or completely changing your lifestyle. Instead, it's about making small, strategic changes that surround you with English in ways that feel natural and effortless. These simple adjustments will give your brain the consistent input it needs to develop English fluency. The first change I always recommend is something you probably use dozens of times every day: your phone. Right now, take a moment to think about how often you interact with your phone throughout the day. You check messages, scroll through apps, set alarms, use navigation, take photos. Each of these interactions is an opportunity to expose your brain to English words and phrases. Changing your phone settings to English means you'll see English vocabulary constantly, without any extra effort on your part. I know this might feel intimidating at first, especially if you're worried about not understanding some settings or features. But here's what I've learned from hundreds of listeners who've made this change. Within just a few days, you start recognizing the most common words and phrases because you see them repeatedly in familiar contexts. When you know you're looking for the camera app, your brain quickly learns to recognize the English word, even if you've never studied it formally. The same principle applies to your computer, your television, and any other devices you use regularly. These small changes create what I call passive learning opportunities. You're not sitting down to study English, but you're exposing your brain to English words and phrases throughout your normal daily activities. This consistent, low-pressure exposure helps your brain become familiar with English in a completely natural way. But let's talk about something even more powerful: integrating English listening into activities you already do every day. Think about your daily routine for a moment. Do you exercise? Do you cook? Do you clean your house? Do you commute to work or school? All of these activities are perfect opportunities to add English listening practice without adding any extra time to your schedule. When you're exercising, instead of listening to music in your native language, try English podcasts or conversations. The physical activity actually helps your brain absorb language more effectively because exercise increases blood flow and helps with memory formation. You don't need to focus intensely on understanding every word. Just let the English sounds and rhythms wash over you while you focus on your workout. Cooking is another fantastic opportunity for English exposure. There are thousands of English cooking shows, food podcasts, and casual conversations about recipes and cooking techniques. While you're chopping vegetables or stirring soup, your hands are busy but your ears are completely available for English input. The relaxed, familiar environment of your own kitchen makes this learning feel comfortable rather than stressful. Even mundane activities like cleaning or organizing become valuable learning opportunities when you add English listening. I have listeners who tell me they actually look forward to household chores now because it's their designated English practice time. They're accomplishing necessary tasks while simultaneously training their ears to recognize English speech patterns. Commuting time is perhaps the most underutilized learning opportunity for most people. Whether you're driving, taking public transportation, or walking, this time can become incredibly valuable for your English development. Instead of letting your mind wander or scrolling through social media, you can be actively improving your English listening skills. The best part is that commuting happens consistently, often at the same time each day, which helps establish a routine. Here's something important that many people don't realize. Even when you're not actively concentrating on English listening, your brain is still processing and learning from the sounds it hears. This passive listening exposure contributes significantly to your overall fluency development. Your subconscious mind is constantly working to recognize patterns and make sense of the English sounds around you. I want to emphasize that consistency is far more valuable than intensity when it comes to language learning. Listening to English for 15 minutes every single day will give you better results than studying for 3 hours once a week. Your brain needs regular, repeated exposure to develop strong neural pathways for English recognition. Think of it like physical exercise. Walking for 20 minutes daily is better for your health than running for 2 hours once a week. This approach also eliminates the guilt and pressure that many language learners feel. When English practice is integrated into your existing routine, you never have to feel bad about skipping study sessions or not finding enough time to practice. You're simply living your normal life while surrounding yourself with English input. Start small with just 1 or 2 changes that feel manageable for your current lifestyle. Maybe you switch your phone to English and listen to English during your morning coffee. Or perhaps you choose English podcasts during your evening walk and English news during breakfast preparation. The key is choosing changes that feel sustainable and enjoyable rather than burdensome. Remember, every single word of English your ears encounter is contributing to your fluency development, even if you don't consciously understand it in the moment. Your brain is constantly collecting data, recognizing patterns, and building the foundation for future comprehension and speaking ability. Let me introduce you to Thomas, a brilliant software engineer from Berlin whose story perfectly illustrates how listening skills directly impact speaking confidence. Thomas worked for a tech company that created applications for international businesses, and his English reading abilities were absolutely exceptional. He could analyze complex technical documentation written in English, understand programming tutorials from American universities, and even contribute to English language forums about software development with detailed, well-written responses. But Thomas had a secret that was limiting his career advancement and causing him significant stress. His company regularly held video conferences with clients from London, New York, and Sydney to discuss project requirements and technical solutions. During these meetings, Thomas would prepare extensively, writing out his thoughts and practicing his presentations alone in his office. However, when the actual meetings began, Thomas would find himself staying mostly silent, contributing only when directly asked specific questions. The problem wasn't that Thomas lacked technical expertise or important insights to share. His colleagues consistently praised his innovative solutions and creative approaches to complex programming challenges. The issue was that Thomas felt terrified about participating in spontaneous English conversation because he worried about not understanding the responses his comments might generate from international clients. Thomas told me about a particularly frustrating experience that made him realize he needed to address this challenge. During a crucial project meeting with American clients, Thomas had prepared a detailed explanation of a technical solution that could save the client significant time and money. He knew his idea was valuable, and he had practiced presenting it multiple times. When the moment came, Thomas delivered his presentation clearly and professionally. But then the American client started asking follow-up questions and making comments about implementation details. They spoke quickly, used informal expressions, and sometimes interrupted each other with additional thoughts. Thomas found himself struggling to process their natural, unscripted responses fast enough to participate meaningfully in the discussion. While he was still trying to decode the first question, the conversation had already moved to 3 other topics. That evening, Thomas felt incredibly frustrated because he realized his listening comprehension was creating a barrier to his professional success. He understood that his reluctance to speak wasn't really about speaking skills at all. It was about his fear of not understanding what other people said in response to his contributions. Thomas knew he had valuable ideas to share, but his confidence was undermined by uncertainty about whether he could handle the natural, fast-paced conversation that would follow. This insight was actually a breakthrough moment for Thomas. Instead of focusing on speaking practice or presentation skills, he decided to dedicate his energy to improving his English listening comprehension. Thomas understood that if he could confidently understand various English accents and conversation styles, his speaking anxiety would naturally decrease because he wouldn't be worried about missing important information or appearing confused during discussions. Thomas began researching how successful language learners improved their listening skills, and he discovered something that surprised him. Many language experts emphasize that listening comprehension forms the foundation for confident speaking, because understanding gives you the security to participate actively in conversations. When you're confident about your ability to understand responses, questions, and comments, you naturally feel more willing to contribute your own thoughts and ideas. This realization changed Thomas's entire approach to English improvement. Rather than practicing scripted presentations or memorizing business phrases, Thomas decided to focus completely on training his ears to understand natural English conversation in various contexts. He understood that his technical vocabulary was already strong, but his ears needed practice with the rhythm, speed, and informal expressions that characterize real business discussions. Thomas also recognized that his listening practice needed to include different English accents and speaking styles, since his international clients came from various English-speaking countries. He had been primarily exposed to formal written English throughout his education, but business conversations often include casual expressions, incomplete sentences, and overlapping speech that sounds completely different from textbook English. The beautiful thing about Thomas's approach was how targeted and practical it was. He didn't try to improve his general English skills across all areas simultaneously. Instead, he identified the specific skill that was blocking his professional progress and focused his energy there. Thomas understood that improving his listening comprehension would have a direct, immediate impact on his ability to participate confidently in international business meetings. Thomas committed to spending time every single day listening to English conversations, but he made sure to choose content that would prepare him for the types of discussions he encountered at work. Rather than selecting random English material, Thomas looked for business conversations, technical discussions, and informal meetings between English speakers from different countries. What Thomas discovered through this focused approach was exactly what he had hoped for. As his listening comprehension improved, his anxiety about English-speaking meetings began to decrease. He started feeling more confident about his ability to understand questions, follow rapid conversations, and catch important details that might affect his technical recommendations. This growing confidence in his listening abilities naturally translated into greater willingness to speak up and share his expertise during international meetings. Thomas developed a brilliant 2-part listening strategy that perfectly balanced intensive focus with natural exposure throughout his day. What made his approach so effective was how he combined what I call active listening with passive listening, creating multiple opportunities for his brain to process English without overwhelming his already busy schedule as a software engineer. For his active listening practice, Thomas dedicated exactly 20 minutes each morning to completely focused English comprehension. During this time, Thomas would sit at his kitchen table with his coffee, put on his headphones, and give his full attention to understanding English conversations. He chose this morning time slot because his mind was fresh and alert, and he knew he wouldn't be interrupted by work calls or other responsibilities. The content Thomas selected for his active listening sessions was strategically chosen to match his professional needs. He started with recorded business meetings between software teams, technical discussions about programming challenges, and client consultation calls from companies similar to his own. This wasn't random English content. It was specifically relevant to the situations he encountered at work, which made every minute of practice directly applicable to his career goals. During these 20-minute sessions, Thomas practiced what I call focused comprehension. He wasn't trying to multitask or do other activities simultaneously. Instead, he concentrated completely on understanding the general meaning of conversations, following the flow of discussions, and recognizing common phrases and expressions that appeared repeatedly in business contexts. Thomas didn't pause to look up unfamiliar words or rewind sections he missed. He simply kept listening, trusting that consistent exposure would gradually improve his comprehension. But Thomas's strategy became really powerful when he added passive listening throughout his entire workday. Thomas realized that he spent nearly 2 hours daily commuting to and from his office, plus additional time during lunch breaks, coffee breaks, and other moments when his hands were busy but his ears were available for English input. During his 40-minute train commute each morning and evening, Thomas listened to English podcasts about technology, business innovation, and general topics that interested him personally. The beautiful thing about this passive listening was that Thomas didn't feel pressure to understand every detail. He was simply exposing his brain to natural English speech patterns while accomplishing his necessary daily transportation. Thomas also made a small but significant change to his work environment. Instead of listening to German music or radio during his coding sessions, Thomas started playing English music with clear lyrics or English-speaking background conversations at very low volume. This created constant, gentle exposure to English sounds and rhythms throughout his 8-hour workday, without disturbing his concentration on programming tasks. The combination of focused morning practice and consistent passive exposure throughout the day created exactly what Thomas's brain needed to develop strong English listening skills. His morning sessions trained his ears to actively process and understand English conversations, while his passive listening throughout the day reinforced those patterns and kept English sounds familiar and natural. Within the first 2 weeks, Thomas noticed that English conversations on his commute podcasts were starting to sound less foreign and more comprehensible. Phrases and expressions that had been unclear during week 1 became recognizable and easy to follow during week 2. Thomas could sense his brain becoming more efficient at processing English speech patterns, even when he wasn't consciously focusing on comprehension. By week 4, something remarkable happened during one of Thomas's work meetings. When his American colleagues were discussing a technical problem, Thomas realized he was following their rapid, informal conversation without the mental strain he usually experienced. He wasn't translating their words into German in his head. He was simply understanding their meaning directly in English. This breakthrough gave Thomas the confidence to contribute his own technical suggestions naturally during the discussion. The real transformation came during week 6 when Thomas volunteered to lead his first international client call entirely in English. Previously, Thomas had always relied on English-speaking colleagues to facilitate these important meetings. But his improved listening comprehension gave him the confidence to handle client questions, explain technical concepts, and manage the entire conversation flow independently. During that meeting, Thomas experienced exactly what he had hoped for. When clients asked questions or made comments about his technical recommendations, Thomas understood their responses quickly and clearly. He didn't feel the anxiety and confusion that had previously made him avoid speaking during international calls. Instead, Thomas felt calm and confident because he trusted his ability to understand whatever the clients might say next. Thomas told me that the most surprising aspect of his transformation was how his speaking fluency improved automatically as his listening skills developed. He hadn't spent any time practicing pronunciation or memorizing business phrases, yet his ability to express ideas clearly and naturally during English meetings had dramatically improved. Thomas realized that confident speaking naturally follows confident listening, because understanding gives you the security to participate actively in conversations. After 6 weeks of consistent daily practice, Thomas became the go-to person at his company for international client relationships. His colleagues started requesting his participation in English-speaking meetings because of his improved communication skills and his ability to handle complex technical discussions with international partners. Thomas's career advancement accelerated significantly because his English listening practice had removed the barrier that was preventing him from fully utilizing his technical expertise in international business contexts. What made Thomas's approach sustainable was how well it integrated into his existing daily routine. The 20 minutes of active listening became as automatic as his morning coffee ritual, and the passive listening during commuting and work simply replaced less beneficial audio content he had been consuming anyway. I want to show how effortless English progress becomes when listening is woven into the small moments that already shape every day. Imagine the new language growing the same way teeth stay healthy, not through one long session at the dentist, but through short, regular brushing that feels automatic. The brain responds to this steady rhythm because repeated exposure strengthens neural pathways far more effectively than a burst of cramming once a week. Even 5 minutes of clear input signals the brain to keep those pathways open and ready for the next sound pattern. Start with a single anchor habit, something that is non-negotiable in the daily schedule, and attach English listening to it so no extra decision is required. If the day begins with a gentle stretch or a coffee ritual, press play on a short podcast during those first sips and let the voices set the linguistic tone for the morning. During a brisk walk to the bus stop, swap playlists for an interview on a topic that sparks genuine curiosity, such as technology, travel, or design, because interest keeps attention alive even when comprehension feels incomplete. When commuting by train, glance at the passing scenery, while an English discussion fills the background, turning idle minutes into active brain training without additional mental strain. Cooking offers another perfect pocket of time because the hands are busy, yet the mind can absorb stories about food, culture, or science narrated in clear English. The simmering of pasta or the chopping of vegetables creates a rhythmic backdrop, allowing pronunciation and intonation to settle naturally into memory, just as seasoning soaks into a dish. Cleaning the apartment can feel lighter when an engaging audiobook accompanies each sweep of the broom, turning chores into language investments instead of monotonous tasks. Exercise amplifies benefits further. Increased blood flow during a run or cycle session enhances cognitive uptake, making each phrase more likely to stick long-term. Many listeners tell me they fear missing words, yet research shows passive exposure still teaches the ear to recognize sound combinations even when meaning is fuzzy. The goal in these moments is not perfect understanding, but comfortable familiarity. The same way background music becomes recognizable after several plays without focused study of the lyrics. Active listening can then be reserved for one intentional block where the mind is fresh, perhaps 10 minutes before lunch, to replay a short segment, catch key ideas, and notice improvements that yesterday seemed impossible. This blend of passive absorption and brief focused attention mirrors natural acquisition cycles observed in successful learners across cultures. Consistency also protects motivation, because tiny habits create visible progress markers that energize rather than exhaust. Tracking streaks on a calendar or noting new phrases in a pocket notebook transforms abstract goals into concrete victories, encouraging another quick session the next day. When a schedule becomes chaotic, shorten rather than skip. 2 minutes of attentive listening still feed the neural circuit and maintain the identity of someone who practices English daily. Over time, the compound effect surprises learners, much like small deposits growing into significant savings without fanfare or strain. Remember that perfection is an illusion that stalls momentum, while routine is a friend that quietly pushes comprehension forward every single day. If one episode feels too fast, slow the speed slightly, or choose simpler content, then return to normal pace after confidence rebounds, treating adjustments as flexible tools rather than signs of failure. Diversify sources to include accents from London, Chicago, and Dublin, so the ear stops depending on one predictable pattern and instead becomes agile enough for real-world variety. Rotating topics keeps excitement alive. 1 week focus on sustainability, the next on sports, the next on inspiring biographies, always letting personal interest guide the playlist, so listening remains a pleasure, not a chore. As these micro-routines solidify, unexpected breakthroughs appear. Recognizing a joke on a movie soundtrack without subtitles, catching an announcement in an airport, or following a casual hallway conversation at work without mental translation. Each small win reinforces the habit loop, proving to the brain that the daily investment pays tangible dividends. Soon, listeners describe English not as an academic subject, but as a companion present during meals, workouts, and commutes, seamlessly woven into the fabric of life. That is the quiet power of routine, turning ordinary minutes into a steady current that carries fluency closer with almost no extra effort. One of the most important lessons I have learned from working with English learners all over the world is that real progress comes when you choose listening material that fits your current level. Content that is neither too easy nor too difficult, but lives right in your own comfort zone. There is a simple but powerful strategy I call the comfort zone strategy that helps you get the balance just right, creating a space where listening isn't overwhelming and new words are picked up naturally. Let's imagine you want to build the habit of listening to English every day. But most authentic podcasts or videos feel way too fast or packed with unfamiliar words. If you force yourself to listen to something that is too advanced, your brain gets tired quickly, motivation drops, and frustration builds. The truth is that language learning should not feel like a constant struggle. On the other hand, if every word and phrase is already familiar, boredom creeps in, your attention drifts, and meaningful improvement slows to almost nothing. The sweet spot, as I like to say, is about 70% comprehension. When you can understand around 70% of what you hear, you feel comfortable enough to follow along and confident enough to keep going. At the same time, that unmastered 30% exposes you to new language, fresh expressions, and a challenge that encourages growth, not discouragement. The first step to finding your comfort zone is to honestly assess what kinds of English you already understand with relative ease. If you can follow slow, clear conversations about daily routines in a beginner podcast, start there. Listen for details about someone's morning, their commute to work, or their favorite weekend activities. Each time you understand without needing to pause or translate, you build a tiny sense of accomplishment. These wins add up quickly and motivate you to keep listening. Once you feel confident with familiar topics, begin introducing a bit more variety. If you like cooking, find English recipe videos that use clear instructions with a calm pace. If you enjoy travel, start with travel vlogs about places or cities you already know in your own language. Your background knowledge will help fill in the gaps and make new vocabulary feel less intimidating. Many learners find that listening to the same story in a few versions, audio, video, or even subtitles, helps solidify understanding and makes the English feel recognizable. What should you do when you don't understand a word or an entire sentence? The answer is simple. Keep going. Try not to pause or rewind the audio for every unknown word. Instead, let your mind focus on the overall meaning, using what you do know to guess the rest. Over time, you'll notice that those mysterious words become familiar, especially when you hear them several times in different contexts. If you select something and it feels like you are lost, and the only way forward is to pause constantly or look everything up, that is a signal to choose something easier for now. Your brain needs regular, successful experiences to trust that listening in English can be enjoyable, not stressful. This is not about limiting yourself forever. As your skills grow, you can gradually reach for more challenging material. At the same time, if a podcast or video makes you want to turn your mind off, or you find your thoughts wandering, it usually means the content is far too easy. In that case, stretch yourself by trying a slightly quicker speaker or choosing a series with a richer variety of vocabulary. I recommend returning to your comfort zone for the majority of your daily listening, then adding a small portion of material that stretches your understanding. Think of it as your main meal and a dessert. The main meal makes you feel satisfied and confident, while the dessert gives you a taste of challenge and excitement. This balance stops fatigue from setting in while still encouraging steady growth. Remember, too, that different days may call for different levels. If you are tired, under stress, or busy with other responsibilities, enjoy your comfort zone materials and don't worry about pushing your limits. When you feel motivated or particularly curious about a subject, let yourself experiment with something a bit harder. The flexibility to adjust each day will keep the experience positive and sustainable over the long term. Finally, I want to remind you that this comfort zone strategy is not just for beginners. Even advanced learners benefit from reviewing familiar topics, solidifying their foundation, and then giving themselves manageable challenges as they progress. It's not a linear path. It is personal and unique to you. What feels right for you might be too simple or too hard for someone else, and that is perfectly fine. The goal is not to impress anyone with your difficulty level, but to improve your own real-world ability to listen naturally and confidently in English. day after day. I want to tell you about Emma, a passionate art teacher from Paris whose English journey perfectly demonstrates how listening to different accents can transform your confidence in real conversations. Emma had spent years studying English in school and university, where she consistently earned excellent grades and impressed her professors with her written assignments and art history analyses in English. She could read complex academic texts about Renaissance painting techniques, write detailed lesson plans in English, and even understand subtitled English documentaries about contemporary artists without any difficulty. However, Emma discovered a frustrating gap in her English abilities during her first summer working as a tour guide at the Louvre Museum. Paris attracts millions of English-speaking tourists every year, and Emma was excited to share her knowledge of French art with visitors from around the world. She had prepared thoroughly, memorizing English vocabulary for artistic techniques, historical periods, and famous paintings. Emma felt confident about her ability to explain the significance of the Mona Lisa or discuss the influence of Impressionist painters. But reality proved much more challenging than Emma had anticipated. When American tourists approached her with questions, Emma found herself struggling to understand their pronunciation, even though she recognized every word they were using when she thought about it later. The Americans spoke with a rhythm and intonation that sounded completely different from the careful, slow English she had learned in her university classes. Words like water sounded like warder to her ears, and party sounded like party, making her second-guess what they were actually asking. Even more confusing for Emma were the British tourists who visited the museum. While she had learned what her teachers called proper English pronunciation, the reality of British accents proved far more diverse and challenging than she had expected. Some British visitors spoke with what she later learned was received pronunciation, which sounded familiar from her textbooks. But others had regional accents that seemed to drop certain sounds entirely or add emphasis in unexpected places. Emma felt embarrassed and frustrated because she could see the tourists getting impatient when she asked them to repeat their questions multiple times. The breaking point came when a group of American art students asked Emma for directions to a nearby cafe where they could grab lunch between museum visits. Emma knew exactly where the cafe was located. She understood the individual words they were using, and she had given those same directions in French hundreds of times. However, the students' natural, rapid American pronunciation made their simple request sound like a foreign language to her trained ear. Emma found herself stammering and struggling to respond, despite having perfect knowledge of both the vocabulary and the information they needed. That evening, Emma realized that her years of English study had focused almost exclusively on written materials and formal, slow speech patterns. Her ear had never been trained to process the natural variations in English pronunciation that occur when native speakers from different countries and regions communicate in real-world situations. Emma understood that this was the missing piece in her English education, and she needed to expose herself to the variety of English accents she would encounter as a museum guide in international Paris. Emma decided to approach this challenge systematically by dedicating time each day to listening to English speakers from different countries and regions. She started researching the differences between American and British pronunciation patterns, learning that Americans typically pronounce every R sound, while many British speakers drop the R at the end of words. Emma discovered that American speakers often soften their T sounds in the middle of words, while British speakers might use what linguists call a glottal stop in place of certain consonants. More importantly, Emma realized that her discomfort with different accents wasn't a reflection of her English ability, but simply a result of limited exposure to accent variety. Research shows that accent comprehension improves dramatically with regular listening practice, and Emma felt encouraged to know that many successful English speakers had overcome similar challenges through consistent exposure to diverse pronunciation patterns. Emma committed to spending 30 minutes each morning listening to English content from different countries, rotating between American travel vlogs, British cooking shows, Australian interviews, and Canadian podcasts. She chose topics related to art, culture, and tourism, so the content would remain interesting and relevant to her professional life, while training her ear to recognize and understand the natural pronunciation variations she encountered daily at the Louvre. Emma developed what I consider to be one of the most effective accent exposure strategies I have ever encountered. She decided to use her daily 30-minute walk through the beautiful streets of Paris as her dedicated listening practice time, creating a routine that felt natural and enjoyable, rather than like formal study. Every morning before heading to the Louvre, Emma would put on her headphones and start her walk through the Latin Quarter while listening to different English accents from around the world. Emma's strategy was beautifully systematic. She divided her week into different accent-focused days, rotating through various English-speaking countries so her ear could become familiar with the unique pronunciation patterns of each region. Mondays were dedicated to American English, where Emma listened to travel vlogs from tourists visiting New York museums, food shows from California chefs, and casual conversations between American art students discussing their favorite painters. These American voices helped Emma understand why her museum visitors pronounced words like dance and class with sounds she had never heard in her university classes. Tuesdays became British English days, and Emma discovered there was much more variety in British pronunciation than she had ever realized. She started with BBC documentaries about British art history, then gradually expanded to include conversations with people from London, Manchester, and Edinburgh. Emma found it fascinating to hear how the same words could sound so different depending on which part of Britain the speaker came from, and she began to understand why some British tourists at the Louvre seemed to speak completely differently from her textbook recordings. Wednesdays were devoted to Australian English, which initially surprised Emma with its unique rhythm and intonation patterns. She listened to Australian travel bloggers sharing their experiences visiting European art museums, and she discovered that Australian speakers often made statements sound like questions, with their voices rising at the end of sentences. This practice helped Emma feel more comfortable when Australian tourists asked her questions at the museum, because their natural speech patterns no longer sounded foreign to her ears. Emma also dedicated time to Canadian English on Thursdays and Irish English on Fridays, giving herself exposure to the full spectrum of English pronunciation variety she might encounter in her work as a museum guide. The Canadian speakers often sounded similar to Americans, but with subtle differences that Emma learned to recognize, while the Irish speakers brought a musical quality to their English that required Emma to adjust her listening approach. What made Emma's approach so successful was her focus on content that related directly to her professional interests and daily experiences. Instead of listening to random conversations, Emma deliberately chose art-related content, travel discussions, and cultural topics that connected to her work at the Louvre. This strategy meant that Emma was simultaneously improving her accent comprehension and expanding her professional vocabulary in English, making every minute of practice directly applicable to her museum guide responsibilities. Within just 2 weeks, Emma noticed remarkable improvements in her ability to understand different English accents during her museum tours. When American visitors asked questions about Impressionist paintings, Emma could process their natural pronunciation patterns without the confusion and delay she had previously experienced. British tourists no longer seemed to be speaking a completely different language, and Emma felt confident responding to their questions about French art history with clarity and enthusiasm. The real transformation became evident after 2 months of consistent daily practice. Emma successfully guided a diverse group of international tourists that included visitors from Texas, Scotland, Sydney, and Toronto, all in the same afternoon tour. Instead of feeling overwhelmed by the variety of accents and pronunciation styles, Emma found herself naturally adjusting her listening to accommodate each speaker's unique patterns. She could understand questions, follow conversations, and provide detailed explanations regardless of which English-speaking country her visitors represented. Emma told me that the most rewarding aspect of her accent exposure practice was how it changed her relationship with English diversity. Instead of viewing different accents as obstacles to overcome, Emma began to appreciate the richness and variety that different English speakers brought to conversations. She realized that her initial frustration with accent differences had been limiting her ability to connect with international visitors, and her systematic listening practice had opened up entirely new possibilities for meaningful cultural exchange at the museum. I want to acknowledge something that every single English learner experiences but rarely talks about openly. Those moments when English listening feels absolutely impossible, when voices seem too fast, when unknown words pile up like obstacles, and when you wonder if you'll ever truly understand natural English conversation. These feelings are not signs of failure or lack of ability. They are completely normal parts of the learning process, and I want to share practical solutions that will help you move through these challenges with confidence and persistence. The most common obstacle I hear about from listeners is feeling overwhelmed when English speakers talk at natural speed. You might understand individual words perfectly when they're spoken slowly or written down, but when those same words are spoken at normal conversational pace, everything seems to blur together into an incomprehensible stream of sound. This happens because your brain hasn't yet developed the automatic processing skills needed to keep up with natural English rhythm and flow. Here's a simple solution that works immediately. Slow down the audio. Most podcasts, videos, and audio content can be played at reduced speeds without losing clarity. Start with content played at 75% of normal speed, giving your brain time to process each word and phrase while still maintaining natural intonation patterns. As your comprehension improves over days and weeks, gradually increase the speed until you can comfortably follow conversations at normal pace. This isn't cheating or taking shortcuts. You're training your brain to recognize English patterns at a manageable rate, building the foundation for faster processing later. Another major challenge is the anxiety that comes from encountering unfamiliar vocabulary during listening practice. Many learners feel they need to understand every single word to be successful, and when unknown words appear, they panic, lose focus, and miss everything that follows. This perfectionist approach actually works against natural language learning and creates unnecessary stress that interferes with comprehension. The solution is to embrace what I call strategic ignorance. When you hear an unfamiliar word, resist the urge to pause, rewind, or look it up immediately. Instead, focus on understanding the general meaning of sentences and conversations using the words you do recognize. Your brain is incredibly skilled at filling in gaps and making educated guesses about meaning based on context. Often, you'll discover that you understood the main message perfectly well, despite missing a few individual words along the way. Let me give you a practical example. Imagine listening to someone say, "I went to the bakery this morning and bought some delicious croissants and an amazing chocolate eclair for breakfast." Even if you don't know the words croissants and eclair, you can still understand that this person went to a bakery, bought some food items, and had breakfast. The specific names of the pastries aren't essential for comprehending the overall meaning of the sentence. Slow progress is another obstacle that discourages many English learners from continuing with regular listening practice. Language learning doesn't happen in dramatic overnight transformations. Instead, it occurs through thousands of tiny improvements that are often invisible day to day, but become obvious over weeks and months. When progress feels slow, it's easy to question whether your practice is working or whether you should try a completely different approach. The key to maintaining motivation during slow progress periods is celebrating small victories that might seem insignificant but actually represent meaningful advancement. Did you understand one complete sentence today that would have confused you last week? That's genuine progress worth acknowledging. Did you recognize a phrase you've heard before in a new context? Your brain is successfully making connections between different listening experiences. Could you follow the general topic of a conversation even when you missed specific details? You're developing the listening skills that support natural communication. I recommend keeping a simple progress journal where you write down one small listening victory each day. It might be understanding a joke in a podcast, recognizing a familiar accent more easily than before, or following a conversation topic that previously seemed too advanced. These documented victories serve as concrete evidence that your listening skills are improving, even when progress feels frustratingly slow. Fear of making mistakes also creates significant listening obstacles for many learners. You might avoid challenging listening material because you're afraid of not understanding, or you might give up on practice sessions when comprehension feels incomplete. This fear-based approach limits your exposure to the variety of English input your brain needs to develop strong listening skills. Remember that mistakes and confusion are essential parts of successful language learning, not signs that you're failing or incapable. Every professional English speaker you admire went through exactly the same challenges you're experiencing now. They felt overwhelmed by fast speech, encountered countless unfamiliar words, and had moments of doubt about their progress. The difference between learners who eventually succeed and those who give up is persistence through difficult periods, not the absence of challenges. When listening feels particularly difficult, reduce the pressure by choosing easier content or shorter practice sessions rather than stopping entirely. 5 minutes of comfortable listening practice is infinitely more valuable than 0 minutes of avoided practice. Your brain benefits from consistent exposure to English sounds and patterns, regardless of comprehension level. Most importantly, trust the natural learning process that has already helped you master your native language. Your brain knows how to acquire language through repeated exposure and pattern recognition. Give it time, patience, and regular English input, and breakthrough moments will come when you least expect them. Now that you understand the principles behind effective listening practice, I want to help you create a personalized success plan that fits seamlessly into your unique life, schedule, and learning goals. The most important thing to remember is that the best listening routine is the one you can maintain consistently over weeks and months, not the most ambitious plan that sounds impressive but becomes impossible to follow after just a few days. Let me start by asking you to honestly assess your current daily routine and identify small pockets of time that could become valuable English listening opportunities. Do you spend 10 minutes drinking coffee each morning before starting your day? That could become your dedicated active listening time, where you focus completely on understanding English conversations while you're mentally fresh and alert. Do you walk or drive to work for 15 minutes each way? Those 30 minutes of commuting time could transform into passive listening practice that improves your English without adding any extra time to your schedule. The key is starting much smaller than one of the most challenging aspects of learning English through listening practice is recognizing when you're actually making progress. Unlike mathematics, where you can clearly see improvement through test scores, or physical fitness, where you can measure increased strength, language learning progress often happens so gradually that it feels invisible day by day. Yet these small improvements are constantly occurring, building the foundation for those breakthrough moments when everything suddenly clicks into place. The first sign of progress many listeners notice is increased stamina during listening sessions. When you first start practicing English listening, your brain works incredibly hard to process unfamiliar sounds and patterns, which can feel mentally exhausting after just a few minutes. But as your listening skills develop, you'll find that 20 minutes of English conversation no longer leaves you feeling drained and overwhelmed. This reduced mental fatigue is actually a strong indicator that your brain is becoming more efficient at processing English speech patterns. Another subtle but significant progress marker is improved comprehension of familiar content. Try returning to English material you listened to several weeks ago, and notice how much clearer it sounds now. Words and phrases that previously seemed fast or unclear may now feel completely natural and easy to follow. This improvement often surprises learners because they expect progress to come from understanding new, more difficult content rather than gaining deeper comprehension of familiar material. Pay attention to moments when you catch phrases or expressions that you completely missed during previous listening sessions. Your brain is constantly making new connections between sounds and meanings, and suddenly recognizing a phrase you've heard many times before indicates that these neural pathways are strengthening. These aha moments are precious signs that your listening comprehension is developing naturally and steadily. I strongly recommend keeping what I call a victory journal, where you write just one sentence each day about something positive you noticed during your English listening practice. This might be understanding a joke that made you smile, recognizing an accent more easily than before, or following a conversation topic that previously felt too advanced. These documented small wins serve as concrete evidence of your improvement when progress feels slow or invisible. Physical responses can also indicate listening progress that you might not consciously recognize. Do you find yourself naturally nodding along to English conversations, or do you catch yourself anticipating what a speaker might say next? These automatic responses show that your brain is processing English more intuitively and making predictions based on familiar patterns. When you start responding emotionally to English content, laughing at humor, or feeling engaged with stories, this demonstrates that comprehension is happening at a deeper, more natural level. Progress in listening often comes in waves rather than steady linear improvement. You might have several days where English feels clearer and more accessible, followed by days where everything seems difficult again. This fluctuation is completely normal and doesn't indicate that you're losing skills or moving backward. Your brain consolidates learning during rest periods, and apparent setbacks often precede significant breakthroughs. Track your comfort level with different types of English content as another progress indicator. Perhaps formal presentations feel much easier now, while casual conversations still challenge you. Or maybe you understand British accents better than before, but American accents require more concentration. These shifting comfort zones show that your listening skills are expanding in multiple directions simultaneously. One particularly encouraging sign of progress is when you start noticing mistakes in your own language learning journey, or recognizing patterns in how other non-native speakers use English. This meta-awareness indicates that your understanding of English has developed enough to make conscious observations about language use and pronunciation patterns. Remember that listening comprehension often improves in sudden bursts rather than gradual increments. You might struggle with a particular accent or speaking style for weeks, then suddenly find it completely manageable during one listening session. These breakthrough moments can feel almost magical, but they represent the culmination of consistent practice and gradual neural pathway development. Trust that your regular listening practice is creating the foundation for these exciting progress leaps, even when daily improvement feels minimal or invisible. I want you to take a moment right now and remember something important. Every confident English speaker you admire, every person who seems to understand movies without subtitles, every professional who leads international meetings with ease, they all started exactly where you are today. They felt the same uncertainty about their listening abilities, the same frustration when conversations seemed too fast, and the same doubts about whether they would ever truly understand natural English speech. The only difference between where they are now and where you are today is consistent daily practice and the decision to begin their listening journey. Right now, thousands of people around the world are discovering what you just learned in this episode. They're realizing that fluency doesn't come from perfect grammar knowledge or extensive vocabulary lists, but from training their ears to process English naturally through regular listening practice. Some are sitting in coffee shops in Tokyo, others are walking to work in São Paulo, and still others are commuting on trains in Berlin, all united by the same goal of developing confident English listening skills. What I want you to understand is that your English journey doesn't need to start with a perfect plan or ideal conditions. It starts with one simple decision: choosing to listen to English content tomorrow for just 5 minutes. Not an hour, not 30 minutes, just 5 minutes of comfortable, enjoyable listening that fits naturally into something you're already doing. Maybe that's while you're having your morning coffee, walking to the bus stop, or preparing dinner in your kitchen. Your only job tomorrow is to choose one type of English content that genuinely interests you and press play. Don't worry about understanding every word, don't pause to look up vocabulary, and don't judge your comprehension level. Simply let English sounds wash over you while you focus on enjoying the experience rather than evaluating your performance. This enjoyable, low-pressure approach will create the positive associations your brain needs to make listening practice a sustainable daily habit. I want to be completely clear about something that might surprise you. Your success in developing English listening skills has very little to do with your current level, your age, your educational background, or how long you've been studying English. It has everything to do with your willingness to start small, stay consistent, and trust the natural learning process that helped you master your native language as a child. Every day you expose your ears to English speech. Even passively, you're building the neural pathways that support natural comprehension and confident communication. Remember the stories we shared today about Sophia, Thomas, and Emma. They weren't special or unusually gifted language learners. They were regular people with busy lives who discovered that small, consistent listening practice creates remarkable improvements in comprehension and confidence. Sophia spent 15 minutes each morning listening during breakfast. Thomas combined active and passive listening throughout his workday, and Emma used her daily walks to expose herself to different English accents. All of them started with just a few minutes of daily practice and gradually built habits that transformed their English abilities. I invite you to become part of our English Talk community by sharing your progress with us. After your first week of daily listening practice, come back to the comments and tell us about one small victory you experienced. Maybe you understood a phrase you'd never caught before, maybe you recognized an accent more easily, or maybe you simply felt more relaxed while listening to English conversation. These shared celebrations create motivation and encouragement for everyone in our community who's taking the same journey. Your English listening skills are about to improve in ways that will surprise and delight you. Trust the process, start tomorrow with just 5 minutes, and remember that every confident English speaker began exactly where you are right now. Welcome to your English listening journey, and welcome to the English Talk community, where thousands of learners support each other every step of the way.